Welcome to the Whole Enchilada, a community of high achievers that fight the status quo, rebel against mediocrity, and make life happen. Let's go. Hello, Enchilada Nation. Thank you for joining us again. We are continuing our conversation around wealth building. Joe, thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, awesome. Great to be here.
Yeah, I've just really appreciated our deeper conversations offline and your insight. It's been fun to go down this path with you. So thanks again for participating with this.
Yeah, I love this. I love talking with entrepreneurs and agents about this, and I'll just echo the same thing. I really love our conversations that we have and going through this and continuing our journey.
Awesome. Well, it's interesting today. Our conversation is around rules, specifically money rules. And for those of you that don't know me very well, basically, my mentality is just if someone gives me a rule, I instantly want to break the rule. I am a rule breaker by heart until I figure out why that rule is important for me. As soon as I see why that rule is important for me, then I can be disciplined and commit to it almost at a fault. And so one of the things I had to create for myself early on and kind of coining the phrase of this idea of money rules, meaning for every $1 that comes in that I get, I've already predetermined or pre-chose where every cent of that dollar goes and what portion of it goes to living on and what portion of it goes to pertinent expenses and what portion of it goes to work. And the idea of and I kind of teach my kids about wealth this way is if I pull out my wallet and I have four $1 bills in there, I might take one or two of those dollar bills and I'm going to send them out to play. And my expectation is when they go out to play, that when they come back, they're going to bring a couple of their friends with them. And it's just a really simple way for them to understand. But the idea is for every $1 that you make, have you predetermined what that money is going to be spent on? And Joe, I'd like to hear your thought on this, but one of the things I've noticed over time is a lot of agents are actually a lot of entrepreneurs are pretty determined when they first get into business. They've got ideas, they've got some discipline around creating some element of wealth until all of a sudden they've got a little stack up of cash. And all of a sudden, what do they end up doing with that cash generally when they see that stack up of cash?
Oh yeah, it's like where am I gonna spend this?
Yeah, they instantly go into this idea of like, well, I can buy that. And I could buy that. And I could always wanted this. I'm going to buy that. And almost to not even exhausting that buildup of cash, but a lot of them fall into a trap of like, well, I'm able to create income. So now I can spend more than I'm actually making. And they find themselves in this horrible cycle of spending money they don't have.
Well, yeah. I mean, so we've talked about it before, like profit and loss, right? No one goes into being an entrepreneur and they're like, man, I can't wait to run that P&L. I can't wait to run that profit and loss. That is so much fun. I love it. Now I have a couple clients that are accountants that they do love it, but most people that are more entrepreneurial or real estate agents or salespeople, that is not something they like or look forward to. But I will tell you that that's something you said just really struck with me when you said, yeah, if I know the reasons for the rules, right, then I'm able to incorporate that. I feel kind of the same way. People just tell me a bunch of rules and like, why? What does that mean? Why? So one of the rules here in terms of running your business, and we're going to transition this in a second to your personal, right, is running that P&L, that profit and loss, setting aside money for taxes. I cannot tell you how many people, I mean, we're in a real estate agent world, but it's similar in the entrepreneurial world. How many people run into, that is probably when people actually make money in those worlds, right? That is probably one of the craziest things that I see day in, day out, is that they have not set aside money for taxes in a separate account because it's not being withheld, right? It's not, they may have some type of W-2 income as part of an S Corp or something like that is being withheld from that, but from the other earnings, it's not being withheld. And I mean, I can't imagine a worse thing as getting to the, tax time and going, oh my gosh, I need to come up with $100,000 and not knowing, right? So yeah, so that's kind of a crazy thing, but I'll tell you, we see it. And so I learned that and I started setting that aside, running that profit and loss and in our business. And I think that is that is the easiest way to take some just initial control. And that's one of those money rules that I think that you once you understand that, man, it makes your whole life easier.
Yeah, I think that's money rules does start in business. And for the majority of the people that are leaning into this conversation as entrepreneurs, is you all know, whether you're doing it or not, that you should be running a profit and loss on your business. And the whole point of that is not to just see at the end of the year, like, oh, well, what was my profit? It was you being purposeful in creating and driving the net profit that you demand for yourself. Like we know, based off the millionaire real estate agent model that a lot of our agents run, is they should be running at a minimum of a 30-30-40, meaning 30% cost of sale, 30% expense, 40% net profit. And ultimately, if you're not tracking that number and seeing where you're coming in the net profit, and we see a lot of agent businesses that do a significant amount of business, a significant amount of gross commission income, but when they whittle it down, their net profit is very, very small, as opposed to if a smaller real estate business may be doing less units and less revenue, but their net profit is in excess of an agent's business that's bigger, because they're purposeful on holding accountable to that net profit.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes bigger is not better, right? I mean, and it's funny because we're Keller Williams agents. So Gary Keller there was a shift this year, and I just want to real quickly touch on this.
Yep.
There was a shift in the way he was approaching things and talking with people, because we've seen a lot of growth and tons of growth and great teams and everything else, and them growing and doing tons of units and tons of volume and everything else. And Gary Keller brought the conversation back around and going, okay, well, let's return to your profitability, because at the end of the game, what are you doing? What type of profitability are you creating within that business? Because I mean, I guess some people really love to say, well, man, we sold 300 homes, but when I've seen some of these people, and not all of them for sure, but some of them where they're only taking like 5% of the bottom line overall, and it's like, man, you know what? You probably could have sold like 40 homes and made more money just on your own. So, and whether there's some ego involved in that, it doesn't matter. But well, it does. But we just want to put the emphasis on that profit and loss, and then what you take to the bottom matters, and being focused on that and keeping those dollars accountable.
Yep, exactly. In the last episode, if you didn't listen to it, I'd encourage you to listen to it. One of the things we gave an example of an entrepreneur that was looking to retire when they were 55 with a passive income of $150,000. And ultimately, the exercise we took them through is we determined that person had to have a net worth of at least $4 million for them to be able to create the lifestyle they wanted to off the passive income. And so we're going to kind of further that example today of like, okay, well, how do they create that net worth of $4 million plus in a way that it's producing the income back? So for this example, let's assume that this same agent now has a net profit in their business of about $200,000. Now we're gonna give two examples here of what it looks like for them to net $200,000 and what the money rules may look like for that individual to create that long-term net worth. But then we're also going to flip it a little bit, say, well, what if that agent got really purposeful right now and was able to increase their net worth to $500,000 a year, of how that really closes the gap for them on their journey to creating the net worth that they want. So let's play with this for a minute, Joe, of saying for an agent with a net worth of $200,000, let's kind of walk through what could be, and the reason I'm saying sample money rules is we're going to give you some recommendations around this of what to look at it, but ultimately the money rules have to be individual to them, right?
Right. So, okay. So this is what we're saying. This agent is in their business. They may be doing X number of gross commission, but at the end of when they take it down the bottom line, their net profit for that year, right, is $200,000, right? So now we're going to establish some money rules that go into that a little bit. And the first one is the one I talked about before, is taxes. So my feeling on that, to be safe, is you should be setting aside 30%, right? 30% of $200,000, right? That's $60,000. That immediately goes into another account. You don't touch it. It's there for taxes. So 200,000, that comes off the top. 60,000, that's 30%. And away we go. So and now I'm gonna have Marks. Why don't you kind of start with some of the other categories now that we've gotten that one there?
And Joe, you and I, when we talked about this before, we both agree that this is something where I'd rather set aside a little bit more for taxes that I probably need. And depending on what everything else going on in your world is and how you work with your accountant, you may be able to come in less than 30%, but it's more fun to say, okay, well, I put aside $60,000, or this agent put aside $60,000 for taxes, and maybe they only need $48,000 for taxes. Now they have a $12,000 extra that they get to move down into another one of their money rule buckets to put it to work, as opposed to the other way around. Is if you're too conservative in putting money aside for taxes, say you only put 30,000 aside, and then you got to steal from another one of these buckets that has a different purpose to pay your taxes, which is not a fun conversation to have. So the next one, so we talked about a money rule of 30% for taxes. So 30% of every dollar goes into that bucket. The next one we put on the list is pay to self. Now, a lot of you that have been following the Enchilada Nation for a while know that one of my personal business heroes is my Papa Lou. He was an incredible businessman, and the first business book I ever read was The Richest Man in Babylon that he gave me. And one of the first rules they talk about in The Richest Man of Babylon is pay yourself first. And so ultimately what we put in here is a rule of 10% of every dollar earned should go into paying yourself, meaning savings. And that may look like a savings account for you. It may look like a portion of that may go to savings for your kids' colleges, your 5291 accounts, whatever that is pay yourself first.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, if you haven't read it, that is such a great story, The Richest Man in Babylon. I highly recommend you do it. You can listen to an audiobook. It's fantastic. It's just a great timeless story. And so, all right. So the next thing in that sense is your next bucket that we feel, and Marcus and I feel strongly about this too, is 10% to give, right? 10% to charities, or getting that habit of giving, right? There's a saying that, wealth amplifies who you are, right? And so we want you to get in that habit of giving, along this whole way, because we feel like that's super important. And so that gets you in the habit. So we do not want you to be this person that gets all the way in and is not, all of a sudden, well, now I'm going to give. Well, can you give along the way? Is that possible? Because I think that will help you become a better person. And, we want you to become that person that is amplified, that as you become more wealthy, it amplifies the good in you, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's giving is a muscle that has to be exercised. It's not something you're just going to acquire someday. And that's one of the things, Joe, just as a quick side note, that I've really respected about you personally is your desire to give back and build other people and help in the community. It's just something I admire you. And one of the things that a lot of our listeners may or may not already know is you and I just committed to a local charity and made a pretty sizable donation about something that we're both passionate about. And giving is good and fun on your own, but it made it more fun doing that with you and getting some other entrepreneurs involved in giving back to charities that we're passionate about.
Absolutely.
So 10%. So far we're at 30% to a rule of 30% to taxes, 10% to self, 10% to give. Now we move into necessities. Like one of the things you got to realize is it costs money to live, right? And whether we want to acknowledge it or not, there's you can either live a really lavish big lifestyle and exhaust all your funds, or you could be purposeful in that. And again, going back to the idea of, generally speaking, people spend up to or more of 100% of what they earn. This is where the money rules need discipline. If you predetermine what percentage of your income you're going to live off of, now you've got the ability to say, there's the rest of my income is going to be used to building my future wealth and protecting my future. So under this scenario, we put a 30% to necessities, which that only leaves $60,000 for this person to live on. Now, a lot of us could look at and say, man, that is really tough to do. I will tell you, my first year in real estate is I made under $30,000 my first year in real estate, because I was on a team with a gentleman that was teaching me a lot about investing, and I knew I could make more money somewhere else. but it was about putting myself in a situation to learn from somebody at a much higher level was worth that trade-off for me. So I look back at that time of my life, and it was actually one of the most enjoyable times of my life. My wife and I talk about it regularly, but we figured out how to live a very good, comfortable life on very low funds. And not that we wanted to live that way forever, but we knew that by living on a lower percentage of our income, we were building for our next investment. And then within years, we were then double, triple, quadrupled our income because of being purposeful in how we were living. So again, you have to create your own rules. But for this scenario, thinking this is a younger entrepreneur that really wants to accelerate their wealth building, is we built a smaller percentage of living on that necessity so they can put more into investing.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. We're gonna we'll when we try to get into the next example, we're gonna try to lend some contrast and perspective to these things too, right? So that all that makes sense. So the next bucket would be low risk investment, right? And what we've put in our bucket here is 10% into low risk investment, right? So that's $20,000, and that's going to be some of these investments that are maybe getting lower rates of return, typically, right? And so we're putting that into that bucket. And the next bucket is high risk investment, and that's 5%, which in this case would be 10,000. So Marcus, why don't you talk about kind of those two buckets and your philosophy with those two buckets?
Yeah. I think it's important to identify, because we think we want to be an investor. If everyone says, I want to be an investor. But the idea behind this is a lot of people think investing is getting that home run, where the best investors in the world that I know are just really good at consistently getting singles, doubles. Every once in a while they get a triple, maybe a couple times in their career they get a home run, right? And so I think a healthy way to approach investing is, okay, how do I create these rules that just systematically continue to get singles and doubles? The best players in the National Baseball League are, and they make a ton of money. It's not necessarily that they're hitting the most home runs. It's just that they're consistently getting RBIs, they're getting on base, they're moving the game forward consistently, right? So the idea behind that low risk investment is becoming an expert in a specific type of investing, just being consistent with it, whether that's low index funds. We'll talk about some of these things in future episodes. But for us too, Joe, a lot of people look at investing in real estate as a high risk investment, but where you and I have really become students of the game, I consider investing in real estate a lower risk investment too, if you do it correctly. And I look at higher risk investments like things like, I put some money into cryptocurrency. And at the time when I bought cryptocurrency, I was like, this is I can't put my hands on this. There's no physical asset here. I may or may never see this money again. It turned out well, but that was a high risk investment because I was like, this is a risk that I've got no clue about. I'm not an expert in it at all, but it was a high risk investment, but I was willing to put that money on the line knowing like, this is either going to be a home run or I'm never going to see this money again. Right?
Man, yeah, I 100% agree with that. And it's funny because I feel the same way. I think a lot of it boils down to and this is what, we're the crux of the matter of this whole journey, these classes we're doing is really about getting you educated so that you understand and understand these things that you are going to invest in, right? Because here's the interesting part. I have a client who is, I would call this guy at this point, he is an absolute expert in Bitcoin. Absolute expert in Bitcoin. For him, he feels this is a pretty low risk investment for him. In real estate, we're looking at potentially buying a home for him. He is scared to death, right?
Interesting.
He is scared to death. For me, in real estate, I look at this as being a tangible thing, and I can I'm in it every day. I understand it completely. I understand worst case, best case. I understand everything about it. I feel in real estate investing, the amount of calm I feel compared to putting some money in Bitcoin, and I'm the same way. I'm actually, it's funny, I'm actually looking at that right now, actually. And I'm, I maybe feel like a lot of people, am I late to the game? Well, whatever, that doesn't matter. But that it is crazy how our that experience and that education and that focus, how that changes, and how that changes risk, not only real world risk, because for me, my real world risk, say that quickly, real world risk investing in real estate is much less than his, but also perceived risk as well. And those are two separate things. And the interesting thing, my real world risk is very different than his in real estate. And I would say exactly the same thing in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I don't know much about Bitcoin. So
if you go back to like the richest man of Babylon, just referencing that again, one of the rules they learn in the richest man of Babylon is you have to either invest with experts or be the expert, right? Don't just throw money to the wind, not knowing, but it's like you either invest with someone that is an expert or you be the expert yourself.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And then the last bucket here is what percentage of every dollar goes to a fun bucket. And I think this is important because life is meant to be lived, right? We want to have fun, but we want to be purposeful with that fun. And I'd go beyond just the idea of this percent to fun. And under this scenario, $200,000 net income, that's putting $10,200 a year into that fun bucket. I would go a step further to actually name that account. Is that family trip to Jamaica? Is it to Disney World? Is it money going towards that Porsche or whatever it is name it so you're actually identifying what does that mean to me. And ultimately, a lot of if you look at my fund buckets, and one of the examples I'm going to give is when you have these rules in place, you can actually create within your bank. Like if you logged into one of my banks, is you see my main account and then you see a bunch of other accounts that I've created and I've named them these buckets. And ultimately for every dollar that goes into my main account, I've already pre-created rules that automatically happen every week that says, okay, well, this amount of money every week goes into these accounts and it all trickles down and just feeds all these accounts. So I don't have to think about it every week. It just happens. So like with my savings for my kids, it all just happens every week without me thinking about it. And all these buckets build over time because I created these rules to follow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? There's some of us in the kind of the entrepreneurial type things that we need to do that and we need to like unplug. And sometimes I'm guilty of that. I can self-actualize and understand that. And we have my family, my brother, his wife, they have a little saying, mandatory fun. Well, so yeah, we want to make 5% mandatory fun. That's part of life, and we want to make sure that we're all living that life and living in a way that makes sense, right? It's like we need to have fun, and the thing is, so I do want to stress too that we can't have this situation where we've created a life for ourselves is all about just this focus. We need to be able to have some balance in a real world way, and that is different for everyone. And also and enjoying life along the way. You got to stop and smell the roses.
Yeah, and for me personally, when that fun bucket makes enough money to buy whatever it was that I was like, that's what I want just for fun. For me, it's I have zero guilt around going to buy that thing, and I don't feel like I'm taking away from my kids' college fund or something for them because I've got separate buckets for that are also being fulfilled. So it's this reward for myself in a guilt-free way that, okay, because I'm on track with all my other goals, I get this. I get to do this for myself. Now, real quickly for this example, notice going back to the 10% to low risk investment, 5% to high risk investment, ultimately that ends up being about a little over $30,000 a year that you're going to put to work, that you're going to send out with the idea that they're going to go make some friends and bring back to you. So if we look at if someone got into this and lived exactly these rules for a 10-year span, so let's say someone at 25 committed to these rules, did not increase their income, made exactly $200,000 net income a year, and they committed to living these rules for 10 years. Ultimately, what that looks like over a 10-year span is their total portfolio, investment portfolio, living these terms would be $536,000.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that's a decent amount of money, right? That is a decent amount of money to achieve in that period of time.
So here, I agree with that. And the other side of that is it's interesting to say, Okay, well, going back to our conversation last time of this agent saying they needed a net worth of $4 million, or this entrepreneur saying they needed a net worth of $4 million for them to be able to retire at 55, even though this is good, this entrepreneur is not going to hit their goal of a net worth of $4 million very quickly. Ultimately, it's going to take, for every 20 years, they're going to get $1 million put to work. So this is becomes an 80-year plan for this entrepreneur to hit their 4 million net worth goal.
Right.
So while this is good and impressive, and going back to the statistics, a net worth of $536,000, a portfolio total of $536,000 does put them well ahead of the average net worth across the country. But we're not trying to beat the average. We're trying to create a life by design for this individual. So now the one of the quickest ways that they can affect this is not necessarily say, well, instead of a 10% return, I'm just going to get a 200% return on my money, right? That's not a realistic approach. But what they can do, and one of the biggest things I think anyone can do right now to increase their opportunity for hitting their net worth goal, is increasing their active income.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's what we did in the next example here. Because, well, let me just say one thing before we talk about that. I mean, obviously we're using 10%, and Marcus and I have, the good thing about this, as you learn about investing, learn certain things in that, we've had some investments, man, that have done crazy things. Yeah. Right. Have done really, really great things. But using this as like a benchmark, just trying to give you a rate of return. And we feel like a 10% rate of return, when you really learn about investing and everything, is realistic, right? And so that's a good way to look at this. But we've had tons of investments where we've made 20, 40, 50, 100%. I have a couple that have done 200%.
Yeah.
But that is not what we're talking about in terms of like making a plan.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
You have those investments. It's great. Those are the home runs. So the next thing then is the $500,000 mark, because we're saying, okay, as an entrepreneur, as a real estate agent, we can hopefully we can control our money by some of the activities we do, right? And we can control what that looks like. And there's probably no better way to scale wealth than to have additional income and then additional money to invest. And so now we've kind of taken this and we've you're going to see the buckets change a little bit. So you want to kind of go into that real quick?
Yeah. So let's look at this. Let's say the same agent puts together a game plan to increase their net income to $500,000 a year, which is a big jump from 200,000, right? It's more than doubling their net income every year. But we know this is possible. We know if with purpose you could do it. And a lot of times it's someone just seeing, for me to hit my long-term goal, I have to increase my active income and be more purposeful with my buckets. Well, if to go through this quickly, if let's say this entrepreneur creates a net income of $500,000 a year, we still put 30% aside for taxes. We still do 10% to self. We still do 10% to give. But then we see the percentages start to change, potentially change. Again, these rules have to be your rules. Joe's rules might look a little different than my rules. So ultimately, people have to determine what their own rules are. But in this scenario, we said, okay, well, the previous scenario, we said they were going to live off of 30% of their income, which was $60,000 in the previous example. Now, because the net income has increased, we dropped this necessity bucket to 22%, but it's more money. Now they're able to live off of $110,000. So they're living a better lifestyle day to day because they've earned it. They deserve it. They deserve to be living a higher lifestyle, but it's a smaller percentage as a bucket of their total income, which now we can increase the amount of money we're putting to work. So now instead of a smaller percentage, now we're 10% low risk investment, 10% high risk investments. And then we are also able to increase the percentage that goes to fund. Now we're at 8% to the fund bucket, which every year now, this entrepreneur is putting aside $40,000 a year for fun. But they're also putting aside $100,000 a year to go to work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key. You can see you're spending way more money even on necessities. You're double in all sense, right? You're double what the necessities you were spending before, but it's only 22% right now of your available funds, right? And so And then the other thing, we talked about this before about the tax thing. I think that's great, setting that aside. And the other thing too is once you get into higher level investing, everything else, you start realizing things like depreciation, everything else. Man, I mean, because of that, it's never been a time I've actually had to use all my tax thing. And so now you can see how much you're setting aside for taxes, right? You're going to pay more taxes, and that's one of these things that I do. I see in people like that. I just have to stop and go, okay, wait a second. There's people like, man, if I make more money, I have to pay more taxes. Well, yeah, you're gonna have to pay more taxes, but you're making more money, right? And so I don't want people to get caught in that trap or even like thinking that way. No, yes, you'll pay more taxes, but you are going to be making way more money based upon that. And so having those buckets and reorienting those buckets is super important. You've got way more money to invest. And so why don't you run us through now what that looks like return wise?
Yeah, awesome. So if we run the same scenario of saying now we have $100,000 a year that we're investing, still at an average of a 10% return across all asset classes. Remember, the example we just gave you, that other entrepreneur ended up at a portfolio worth of $500 and something thousand. Under this scenario, now their portfolio is $1.75 million over a 10-year span. So what was an 80-year game plan to a $4 million net worth is now basically a 20-year plan to a $4 million net worth. So it's interesting how that compound effect is really kicks in and makes a big difference.
It does. It's very interesting, right? And the thing to remember along the way is we're just talking about that part that is invested. You also are going to be paying off a house during that time, right? You could, I mean, if you're making that type of money, you could potentially have a house paid off in 10 years, right? Which then would allow you to invest more because you're not having those principal and interest payments on that house. So you can invest that. I mean, it just puts you along a better path. And so with that, one of the things that I just did want to touch on in that is like, okay, well, there's all these different ways of people looking at this and different ways of investing. And when we had these conversations live with the other entrepreneurs and agents, we talked about, we want to drive home the point that like, when we talked about in the last podcast, we talked about, hey, you need to know the game plan or the field you're playing on. That's why we went through statistics about what's going on in net worth and everything else. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is that you need to start wherever you are is where you are, right? And so we had some agents that were, like younger than us and some agents that may have been older than us. And they're all starting or all at different places within their worlds. And I think the thing is that's also something we just have to get going in that and keep moving ahead and having those conversations and getting going no matter where you are. I think one of the things that's interesting in the world is that there's a lot of people that do the best in their lives after they are 50. And I'm 51 and I'm planning on being one of those people. I've done pretty well so far, but I mean, I think you look at some people that have not achieved major success or sometimes even any level of success until what would be considered like a later in their life. There's we get to this thing when we talk about all these entrepreneurs that like, oh my gosh, oh, he made his first 100 million by the time he was 28 years old. Great. That is not people in general, or even successful people in general, yep. Right? I mean, look at someone like Samuel Jackson. His first movie role, he was that was of any significance really. He was 43 years old, and that was Spike Lee, Do the Right Thing, right? And so he's become basically one of the biggest actors of all time at this point, and he didn't have a role of any significance at all until he was 43 years old. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of waiting tables for an actor. I mean, I'm a musician. Like I was spending a lot of time in New York, and so I knew a lot of musicians, actors, and everything else. That's a long time without some type of thing. And so I want to drive home that I think we getting going in this process, no matter where you are, it's a great thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. An interesting exchange in our last meeting was between a 30-year-old entrepreneur and a 50-year-old entrepreneur. And they were talking back and forth a little bit of that, going through this conversation. Both of them had the same aha of like, I can do this, right? It's really easy to get, particularly as you start getting older, to look back and be like, man, if I would have learned this when I was 20, yeah, you would be ahead. But it goes back to that old saying, is the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today, right? So that going back to your point, it's like, don't get discouraged that you didn't start this process earlier, but commit to starting it today. And I applaud all of you for being part of this, leaning into the conversation. What the challenge is today is what are your money rules? Not Joe's money rules, not my money rules, not the examples we gave today, but actually slowing down and determining what is it that you're trying to accomplish, and what are the rules that you are committed to follow to create that destiny for yourself. We have put together a couple worksheets that kind of walk you through and show you these examples. If you'd like a copy of those worksheets, be sure to go to thewholeenchilada.biz, join the network, scroll down. You can also find a video of this the conversation today. We'll make sure there's some links there for the worksheets. But again, this is not something just to listen to and say, there were some good points made there. The idea is, are you committed to your ideal financial future? And if so, join the journey with us and follow the process. Create your rules and live by your rules. Joe, any last thoughts from you, my friend?
No, I love that. I love that. That's great advice. And so, yeah, I just want to echo that this is about taking action. And for most people in this call, they do not have money rules, right? They just do not. And so do the worksheets, figure out your money rules. And here's the thing, like, just because you set this, you figure out your money rule right now, it doesn't mean like 6 months from now you do it and you're figuring out, you're like, oh, okay, now that I've done this a little bit, now I'm going to adjust certain things and figure it out, because you're making them progress on the path, even progress on the path to figuring out, oh, what my money rules actually should be based upon now living with money rules for the first time, right? And so that's I think part of the challenge, and the action to be taken here is start that process, get the money rules going, and then you start refining those and doing other things along the path. And that's because, like, I think sometimes people think I'm going to set this and that's going to be set in stone. No, you're setting it and then you're revising, trying to figure out what's the path to move you ahead in your life, in your business, in your relationships, and everything else, right?
Yep. Great point. All right, my friends, thank you for joining us today. In our next conversation, we're going to be talking about our take on debt, good debt, bad debt, and how to eliminate bad debt quickly, which is going to accelerate you on your path to be able to invest and grow your financial future. So be sure to lean into that conversation. Joe, thanks again for being here today. And my friends that are joining us on this path, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us on social media, and who in your world should be a part of this conversation with us. Be sure to share this episode and this series with them. Let's get them involved. And don't forget, go live life on your terms. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.